Hello, and welcome to How to Draw a Mockingbird. You'll need a few tools before we begin. You'll need pencils, paper, charcoal pencils, an eraser, burnisher or Q-tip, sandpaper, and a horsehair brush, but any brush will do. Alright, let's get started. So I'm sketching in a basic shape of the mockingbird, starting with the body and the tail. The tail's about the same size as the body below the skull, so I'm using my pencil as a measuring device in order to make sure that my observation and measurements are the same. John James Audubon also used observation to study all types of American birds. He's known for his detailed illustrations that depict the birds in their natural habitat, and his major work, a color plate book entitled The Birds of America, is considered one of the finest ornithological works ever completed. Throughout this tutorial, I will be giving you guys some fun facts about John James Audubon. So, going back to the drawing, I've penciled in the shape of the eye as well as the beak, and notice that I've laid in a basic shape of how the feathers that are darker in a certain area close to the cheek are laid in, so that whenever I come back to it, I know where to put those feathers and how to shade them properly. Did you know that Audubon created more birds in the Birds of America in Louisiana than anywhere else? 167 of the 435 birds. Also, Audubon called himself a native of Louisiana even though he was born in a French colony in what is now Haiti, and he was raised in France in his ancestral home. And he immigrated to the United States in 1803 to manage his father's plantation in Pennsylvania. So back to the drawing. I've laid in a few basic shapes for the feathers to lay within. Mockingbirds have really lovely feathers, especially the gray and the whites and the blacks. They have really lovely tones within them, which is part of the reason that I chose to draw this particular piece for you guys today. Alright, so I'm laying in that tail, laying in the basic shape, as well as leaving room for the highlights and the darks that are to come whenever I start using the charcoal. This is really just meant to be a rough sketch before you get to business with the shading. Audubon started his work for the Birds of America in New Orleans in 1821. In the spring of 1821, he stayed at Oakley Plantation in St. Francisville, Louisiana, for 4 months. He worked as a part-time tutor and spent the rest of his time in the woods surrounding the plantation seeking new bird subjects. Alright, so we're going to pick up our charcoal pencils now and get to work. I usually start with the darkest portion of my drawing. So in this case, that would be the eye and the beak. Also, I like to start with the details because I find that I have the most patience at the beginning of a drawing as opposed to later on. So, remember at the beginning I said that you could use a burnisher or a Q-tip. So in this instance I have a Q-tip with the cotton on the tip of it, and then I also use a Q-tip without the cotton on the tip of it, as well as my burnisher. This is just going to let you guys know that even if you're at home and you don't have a burnisher in your studio, or if you don't have a studio, then you're always welcome to go ahead and grab a Q-tip and to not be discouraged just because you don't have the art supplies ready and on hand. Did you know that Audubon was the first person to place tags on birds in order to track their movements? He did this by tying a piece of yarn on the bird's leg. Also, Audubon is credited with disproving the myth that vultures hunt using scent. He performed experiments with fresh and rotten game and discovered that scent did not affect the vulture's ability to locate their next meal. Okay, back to the drawing. So you'll notice that I use my eraser a good bit, and I tend to use it almost like a pencil, as if I'm going back in and drawing in with the eraser. So any of the highlights or anything like that. I find it really, really useful to do this whenever I'm drawing things with feathers and or hair. Now I'm going in and laying some detail into these feathers here where they are darker, and then leaving room at the bottom of each feather for that beautiful white highlight. Now you'll see here that I'm using my sandpaper to make my eraser into a sharper point. This really helps me out whenever I am trying to get a little bit more detail than what my standard eraser that's been used a lot will allow. So I'm really sure to try and get a little bit more detail and lay that in with the eraser, and I like doing that by getting a sharper point. So I like to have sandpaper handy. And any sandpaper will do. This one was 1,200 grit. But I've used 180, I've used 220, so it's not very particular, just so that you can get that point on that eraser. Alright, so let's talk about John James Audubon a little bit more. Did you know that he was rather vain about his hair, which was chestnut colored and long enough to reach his shoulders, very unfashionable in 1820. And while he was working on the Birds of America, Audubon discovered 25 new species and 12 new subspecies. Can you imagine finding a new species of animal? Alright, so let's talk about the drawing a little bit more. I'm laying in the basic feathers along the back and with his wings, and once again using my eraser to make sure that I keep those highlights, and also using it almost like a pencil, so really making sure to give it a nice sweeping motion whenever I am drawing. And then I go in and I add the kind of gray tones, and then my darkest darks, I burnish them in, and then I make sure to go back with the eraser and add my highlights. Another fun fact about Audubon is he is quoted saying, "The state of Louisiana has always been my favorite portion of the Union, although Kentucky and some other states have divided my affections." And we do know that in Louisiana we love John James Audubon. He's been very influential in so many different ways, with science as well as art and observation. Speaking of observation, let's talk about the drawing a little bit more. I'm laying in more of those tail feathers, once again using the eraser, penciling it in, getting a nice round shape to that tail, and burnishing. The burnisher is a really great way to kind of get a nice middle gray. I find that if I try and do it with my finger, it gets a little bit too cloudy, which is why I recommend using the Q-tip or the burnisher. So you can see the drawing is really starting to come together. So right now I'm just penciling in those basic shapes of the leaves, and I'm making sure to use the eraser to make the veins. And it's important to really look at the veins and use your observation, because if they kind of all match, it tends to look much less organic and much less natural. The Louisiana Art and Science Museum has several Audubon prints in our collection. There's one that I want to show you now called the Carrion Crow, or the Black Vulture. This particular piece is a hand-colored engraving. Audubon observed these birds throughout the southern parts of the United States, and even as far north as Maryland. Did you know that the town of Carrion Crow, Louisiana was named after the carrion crow? Look closely while driving around our state, and you will likely see a carrion crow on the side of the road enjoying a sampling of roadside cuisine. So we're finishing up our drawing, adding in those last couple of leaves, really taking the time to observe their shape and how they appear in nature. Alright, that's it. You have your beautiful drawing of a mockingbird. Be sure to remember that John James Audubon has really influenced a lot of our science and art through his observations with nature. So I really encourage you to go outside today and draw something, anything that you see. The natural world is truly beautiful and exquisite. And be sure to tag the Louisiana Art and Science Museum in your post, and we'll feature you on our Instagram stories at LASMBR, or send us an email with your picture at submissions@lasm.org. Thank you so much for your time.